30 years ago, the sky opened up, releasing hordes of monsters from another world. Humanity called this sudden phenomenon the breakthrough. In response to the invasion, the world began to change. People received classes and entered a new era. The heroes successfully repelled the attacks of the monsters, defending the cities. This is how new classes and abilities emerged to combat the threat. Soon a hierarchy emerged, with the ruling caste at the top. All the rest who did not receive powers became commoners. They were often abandoned to their fate as useless trash. But Tatsuma Amori himself believed in a different future. He hoped that one day the era of swordsmen would return, giving everyone a chance. 3 years ago, Tatsuma Amori found himself in this world as a transmigrant. He was taken in by a poor but loving family, who gave Tatsuma a home. Father was sorry that they could only give him a modest sword. They promised to work even harder to give their son a better future. The parents' dream is magical equipment and the best school for Tatsuma. Despite his status as a commoner, his mother believed in his special soul. The world has changed, but old ideas about power and origins still live on. They will never understand that true strength does not come from bloodline. It was an old, battered, and unsightly sword. Tatsuma Amori, full of determination, vowed to end his family's suffering. He dreamed of becoming the one who would revive the great era of swordsmen. As time went on, Tatsuma surpassed everyone in martial arts, astonishing even S-ranked students. For many commoners, it became the last hope for a better future. Everyone's favorite and rising star among the commoners, Tatsuma Amori, approached the ancient artifact. He, despite being without a class, passed all the martial arts exams and received the highest score in fencing. However, for members of the elite families, all his achievements meant nothing. Meanwhile, other commoners listened with alarm to the snob's caustic comments. One of them loudly declared that fencing skills alone were not enough. He reminded everyone that swords, as weapons, had become obsolete many years ago. In their opinion, even the highest rank will not change his low origin. For them, any success of a commoner is just a fleeting illusion, incapable of changing the system. He ended by calling on all common people to stop their naive dreams. Despite all the ridicule, Tatsuma focused and prepared for the most important test. With a determined face, he extended his hand, activating the ancient class determination mechanism. A powerful burst of energy illuminated the entire hall, captivating the gaze of everyone present. Finally, his official title appeared on the screen: D-rank swordsman. A murmur of disappointment arose among the common people. Their hopes had not been fulfilled. They couldn't believe that after all his efforts, the result was only a low rank. But elite students openly mocked the commoners, claiming that the system had simply rejected them. But for Tatsuma, who had received a D rank, this was only the beginning of his carefully laid plan. After the class development, the teacher announced the start of the test that determines admission and rank at Ryujin University. The elite students continued to watch the proceedings with arrogance, expecting a spectacle. Tatsuma felt their gazes because he was the only commoner who had reached this stage. The instructor explained that each participant would receive starting equipment when their name was called. S-rank magic student whom the others immediately recognized. Everyone considered Makusawa to be a true genius with SSS rank potential. She was given a magnificent elven bow with ice element, perfect for her class. Having received her weapon, Makusawa stepped aside, and the teacher called out the next one. When Tatsuma asked for a sword, he was reminded that a D- rank swordsman was only allowed a basic weapon for physical combat. The teacher mockingly handed Tatsuma a rusty sword, calling it trash that would be thrown away after the test anyway. One of the students immediately ridiculed Tatsuma, saying that his sword without magical enhancement was just scrap metal. Another student demonstrated a powerful axe with an electrical element, hinting that a sword without magic is useless. Tatsuma, clutching a rusty blade in his hand, began to reflect on the situation of commoners. While the nobility makes frivolous use of divine equipment, it is not available to commoners. They turn the power of imagination into a weapon to fight and survive. The test will take place in a forest dungeon teeming with weak monsters of the lower world. For safety, all participants are advised to stay in groups to avoid unnecessary risks. Points earned in a group will be distributed equally among all its members. When Tatsuma tried to leave, a group of students mockingly stated that no one would want to team up with a guaranteed underdog. Makusawa, surprised, asked him if he was really going to go alone. Tatsuma smiled and noted that no one would want to team up with someone like him anyway. Well, if so, he can handle it himself. He understood that this test would be his first and only step on the path to the world of the rich. While others rely on enhanced equipment to give them instant power, Tatsuma only has his rusty sword. With his rusty sword, which only had an attack power of 1 and a chance of breaking with every hit, The chances seemed slim. Makusawa wondered where he got the confidence to go into the dangerous forest alone. Maybe it was his S rank in fencing, but it was the most difficult and thankless discipline. Moreover, physical combat classes simply cannot survive in this world. But Tatsuma seemed completely unperturbed by her words. Turning around, he stepped decisively into the shining portal of the dungeon. He believes that true strength comes from conviction, not status, and intends to restore honor to the swordsman class. Tatsuma thought about how wealthy nobles simply relied on magical equipment without having any power of their own. It only takes one swing to unleash destructive magic, and it's a shortcut that only costs money. Meanwhile, another student easily crushes the monster with his electrically charged hammer. The proud student with the hammer immediately began to boast to his comrades about how powerful his equipment was. The second student in the robe admitted that with such an elite weapon, anything could be done in the beginner's dungeon. The student proudly stated that this B- rank weapon was commissioned by his father from a national-level blacksmith. He boasted that his hammer could knock down even third-level monsters with one blow. Suddenly, a blond man with knives sharply attacked the student in the robe. The student in the robe, stunned by what he saw, wondered what was happening. His bewilderment grew because such a sight was extremely unusual. There was a whole mountain of defeated wolves lying in front of him, which was clearly not normal for the initial dungeon. He couldn't understand how so many monsters had been killed in such a short time. His comrade confirmed that on the way here, they had not seen a single strong detachment capable of this. The magician decided to use magical detection to find out the source of this unimaginable power. To his surprise, no magical traces were found, which was completely incomprehensible. Tatsuma suddenly appeared and demanded that they leave immediately, declaring the monsters to be his prey. The guy with the hammer who appeared next only laughed when he saw Tatsuma with his rusty sword. He didn't believe that someone with such a weapon could deal with the monsters alone. The guy with the hammer mocked Tatsuma, claiming that physical attacks couldn't hurt anyone here. The student in the robe suggested that only a powerful mage could boast of such a large-scale purge. After all, this is the only way to explain the destruction of so many monsters in such a short time. At that moment, another wolf appeared. But Tatsuma prepared to attack without hesitation. He swung his rusty blade swiftly, striking. However, after the blow, his sword shattered, causing the mage to cry out in surprise. The guy with the hammer immediately accused Tatsuma of lying, because his sword couldn't withstand the blow. The rage on his face spoke of complete disregard for Tatsuma. Tatsuma just smiled, suggesting that their common sense might be wrong. The guy with the hammer, seeing his calmness, only became more angry, considering Tatsuma a poser. The robed mage screamed, warning Ven of the danger approaching from behind. A huge wolf suddenly attacked Ven from behind, its mouth open, but his attack was suddenly interrupted, and the wolf howled in pain, flying to the side. Meanwhile, Ven brought his hammer down with all his might on the thrown monster. Wen looked at Tatsuma in confusion, trying to figure out how he had struck. He could not believe in Tatsuma's abilities, considering his success to be pure chance. Tatsuma recalled his father's words about how, after the breakthrough, monsters became immune to physical damage. Even powerful physical attacks on monsters caused only 0 damage. As a result, physics classes became a target for ridicule. But Tatsuma was different. His talent, sword synchronization, ignored all resistances and buffs. Although it was only a passive talent, it allowed damage to be dealt based on pure physics. Thanks to this, Tatsuma was confident that he could defeat even a king-class monster. After this, Tatsuma calmly said goodbye and got ready to leave, leaving them behind. An indignant Wen shouted at him not to move from his spot, demanding an answer. He wouldn't let Tatsuma just walk away with all the points that were rightfully theirs. Tatsuma, without saying anything, listened attentively to his threats. Wen stated that the points Tatsuma received in this test meant nothing. Tatsuma understood that for these people it didn't matter how many points he scored. It was clear to him that now they wanted only one thing: to take away his glasses. Wen stated with a grin that even if Tatsuma was lucky enough to survive until the end, there was a certain rule of theirs. Wen directly demanded that he give up all his points and immediately withdraw his candidacy. A strange blue glow suddenly appears on Tatsuma's hand. Wen proudly declared that no one could stand against the 3 of them with divine equipment. But Tatsuma only smirked at their arrogance. This grin angered Ven even more, and he felt insulted. His companion warned that controlling the power of the wild hammer was very difficult. Suddenly, electrical discharges began to spark around his hammer. Everyone froze in confusion, trying to understand the reason for what had happened. Tatsuma's gaze was fixed on something in the distance, foreshadowing trouble. A huge creature burst out from underground, taking everyone by surprise. An elite monster, a 5th-level wolf lord, appeared, attracted by their noise. Forgetting about Tatsuma, Ven's companion was filled with excitement, anticipating a huge reward. Ven ordered Lance to attack first, using his frost abilities. Lance charged at the monster using his ice blade ability, but the monster easily threw Lance aside, demonstrating its incredible power. With one blow, the monster knocked out Lance, shocking the entire group. The mage panicked and realized that the threat level was higher than normal tests, and they could die. Malotnik cried out in despair that running was their only way out. They immediately started running, leaving Tatsuma alone to face the danger. At the same time, he thought only of himself, viewing his friends as bait for the monster. One of the escapees barely managed to break away from the Wolf Lord pursuing him. While his so-called allies fled, Tatsuma calmly prepared for battle. Tatsuma considered the Wolf Lord's appearance a great opportunity to test his strength and grow in battle. He rushed forward to meet the monster in direct combat. Tatsuma didn't hesitate, quickly closing the distance to the dangerous enemy. When Tatsuma launched his first strike, he intended to gauge the true strength of his opponent. His blade clashed with the Wolf Lord's claws, but the blow did no significant damage. In response, the monster threw Tatsuma away with a powerful swing of its paw, demonstrating its physical strength. Tatsuma, upon landing, realized how durable the Wolf Lord was. In response, the Wolf Lord let out a furious roar, demonstrating his indomitable power. Tatsuma noticed that the monster had become even faster and more aggressive. Holding back the monster's insane power, Tatsuma felt the ground crack beneath his feet. Tatsuma struggled to hold his blade, unable to understand why the monster was so incredibly strong. His sword was struggling to withstand the pressure, and Tatsuma knew the weapon would soon reach its limit. Ven seemed to stop as the sounds of the ongoing battle reached him. The mage was shocked to realize that Tatsuma had somehow managed to repel the Wolf Lord's attack. Tatsuma tried his best to hold back the crushing blow, but the monster's onslaught was unbearable. Wen watched the battle from afar, considering Tatsuma's resistance to be futile suicide. At the very brink of despair, a primal fighting instinct awakened in Tatsuma, surpassing all reason. With renewed determination, he focused on defense, repelling the Wolf Lord's powerful attacks. Tatsuma enters a mode where every move is a deadly dance. He decided to snatch victory from the very jaws of death. His fighting spirit and sword resonate, amplifying his attack many times over. Tatsuma strikes back, expertly dodging the monster's teeth. The Wolf Lord's furious roar indicates that Tatsuma's attack has hit its target. Tatsuma pulls back, feeling the monster's monstrous strength even after being hit, but his determination is unwavering. He is not going to lose. In response, the Wolf Lord flies into a furious rage, becoming even more menacing. The enraged monster attacks Tatsuma with all its might. Tatsuma deftly dodges his attacks, not forgetting about the smaller wolves. Now Tatsuma hits the monster, using every chance to counterattack. He strikes a second time, causing the monster to stagger back. Tatsuma's powerful strike sends the Wolf Lord flying. The monster falls to the ground with a crash, and Ven watches what happens. Seeing how Tatsuma dealt with the monster, Ven can't believe his eyes. Tatsuma turns around, his gaze piercing. "Get out of my way!" came the cold command from his lips. Ven, overwhelmed by Tatsuma's strength and aura, barely recognizes him as his old comrade. Tatsuma's aura has changed so much that Ven sees him not as a human, but almost as a demon. Tatsuma prepares to deliver the finishing blow to end the monster once and for all. Tatsuma feels very dizzy, realizing that he has overexerted himself. His body is completely exhausted, working at the limit of its capabilities. At this point, Tatsuma is distracted by something and asks, "When?" Ven, appearing out of nowhere, prepares to strike, recognizing Tatsuma's genius. Electricity erupts around Ven as he activates a powerful ability. Tatsuma turns around with bloodshot eyes, and his gaze frightens Ven. Ven strikes, and Tatsuma, wounded, spits out blood. Wen continues the attack, trying to convince himself that his fear of death justifies betrayal. Ven explains that his plan is to frame Tatsuma's death on an elite monster. Ven raises his hammer for the finishing blow, and the electric aura around him intensifies. Tatsuma, seriously wounded, leans on his sword, gathering his last strength. His eyes flash red, and Tatsuma vows not to give in to such a vile blow. Ven brings down his hammer, but Tatsuma, clinging to the last shreds of pride, prepares to respond. The energies collide, reflecting Ven's fury and Tatsuma's steely determination. A flash of energy envelops them as Tatsuma makes a swift move. Ven is thrown back as a powerful stream of dark energy erupts from Tatsuma. To everyone's surprise, the fallen Wolf Lord suddenly comes back to life, surrounded by an ominous aura. Tatsuma is stunned by what is happening, not understanding how this is possible. The sudden silence highlights the piercing gaze of the reborn predator. To everyone's shock, the Wolf Lord now stands behind Tatsuma like his loyal guard. Tatsuma realizes that the Wolf Lord has entered a state of blood rage. This is a state where a mortally wounded monster releases power many times greater than normal. Tatsuma realizes that the Wolf Lord pretended to be dead to catch him off guard. However, the numbness wears off and Tatsuma prepares to counterattack the beast. He looks for a weak spot in the Wolf Lord's attack. Tatsuma stabilizes his stance by placing his sword on the ground. With concentrated power and determination, Tatsuma strikes back. He dodges the onslaught, his blade cutting through the air. Having dodged the fatal bite, Tatsuma finds a moment to strike again. Synchronizing with the blade again, he brings down a blow on the monster that cuts through the ground. Tatsuma's powerful strike pierces the Wolf Lord, ending his rage. Finally, the Wolf Lord is defeated, and Tatsuma receives 10,000 points for the victory. At this time, an archer runs up to Tatsuma, and the system requests high-ranking support. Tatsuma smirks, knowing that everything is working out for the best. The archer is also up to no good, considering this the perfect moment. Her gaze, full of hidden intentions, falls on the weakened Tatsuma. Meanwhile, Ryujin University announces the results of the entrance examinations. The crowd is excited and can't believe the huge gap between Tatsuma and the others. They're outraged. How could Tatsuma score 25 times more points than the S-rank hunter Setsu Makusawa? A cry of injustice is raised, demanding an investigation and pointing to the wounded pride of the nobility. An angry crowd demands that Tatsuma's results be annulled, accusing him of cheating. The university administrator, after hearing the complaints, seems to take them into account. With a serious face, the administrator announces that he has extremely unpleasant news. It turns out that a serious incident occurred during the exam, which demonstrated the danger of the task. The administrator shocks everyone by announcing the death of 2 aristocrats and the injury of another. The man in glasses continues to hold the crowd's attention, preparing for further explanation. Hearing about the casualties, the crowd, in horror and anger, begins to realize the scale of the tragedy. Away from the general commotion, Tatsuma rests silently, observing what is happening. An archer with a serious expression approaches Tatsuma, who is healing his wounds. Tatsuma reflects that he was extremely lucky, considering all the circumstances of what happened. The archer tells Tatsuma that she herself saw the scene of the incident and the massacre that took place there. She asks Tatsuma directly if he really dealt with the Wolf Lord alone. The archer speculates that the dead nobles were attempting to attack Tatsuma or steal his loot. Tatsuma only raises his bandaged hand, choosing to remain silent in response to her guesses. When the archer asks about excuses, Tatsuma briefly replies that it is pointless. With his eyes closed, he remains calm, demonstrating his unwavering determination. Tatsuma takes up his blade, clearly intending to prove his abilities in action. He claims that his abilities speak for themselves better than any excuses. The administrator decides to annul Tatsuma's result in order to appease the indignation of the crowd and the aristocracy. Now the administrator is ready to announce his final decision to everyone gathered. Several young aristocrats rub their hands together in anticipation of Tatsuma's downfall. The administrator displays a list of the best entrance exam results on the board. First place, as expected, goes to Setsu Makusawa by a huge margin. The administrator confirms that Setsu Makusawa has scored a record 419 points. But the most interesting thing is below. Tatsuma Emori is in 100th place with a 0 result. This news causes bewilderment and shock among everyone who followed his successes. Angry viewers suspect forgery and demand an explanation. The administrator's face expresses obvious tension, which does not escape the public's attention. Despite the crowd's outrage, the system confirms Tatsuma's 0 result. Then the administrator reminds the player of the rule about deducting points for attacking allies or interfering in someone else's battle. It shows a list of participants who have received fines for similar violations, explaining the cancellation mechanism. Tatsuma immediately realizes that those who tried to frame him are behind his 0 score. He realizes that he has become the victim of a deliberate intrigue. One of the influential aristocrats openly mocks Tatsuma, doubting his prospects. They are sure that without their protection, Tatsuma is doomed and will not last at the university. But Tatsuma just smirks and says he's looking forward to how things will develop. He is determined not only to act, but also to show everyone his true strength. The action shifts to the main gate of Ryujin University, where students are gathering. Tatsuma stands among the other first-year students, ready to begin a new chapter of his life. However, even here, cruelty and arrogance immediately appear. Aristocrats mock ordinary students. The aristocrat points to a separate entrance, contemptuously calling the ordinary students scum. One of them stops another commoner student who is trying to pass unnoticed. An arrogant aristocrat points at a humiliated guy with a sly smile. He then roughly grabs the unfortunate student by the collar, clearly provoking a conflict. A tight grip demonstrates a complete disregard for personal boundaries. Suddenly, Tatsuma intervenes, stopping the bully's hand, much to his surprise. The aristocrat is confused when he realizes that it is Tatsuma in front of him. Tatsuma, pushing the bully away, contemptuously declares that he did not expect to meet a suicide. The bully, admitting to rigging the entrance exam, can't understand how Tatsuma still passed. Then the aristocrat mockingly offers Tatsuma the humiliating ritual of entry for commoners. He points directly at Tatsuma, emphasizing that these rules apply to him personally as well. Tatsuma, with a dangerous grin, begins to talk about students who earn their place through true skill. He hints that people like them only bring shame on the university. The outraged aristocrats are enraged by the insolence of the commoner who dared to contradict them. They openly declare that nobles have the right to use force against commoners and will remain unpunished. Tatsuma calmly replies that he expected such arrogance from the nobles on the very first day. He calls them a pathetic bunch who bully the weak just to assert themselves. Tatsuma points his finger at the aristocrat, directly accusing him of baseness. The aristocrat, in a rage, threatens Tatsuma, saying that he seems to be tired of living. Tatsuma, without flinching, suggests that they all pounce on him together if his words irritate them so much. Tatsuma makes it clear that he intends to return to them all the pain they caused. There was a clear readiness for retribution in his eyes. He directly states that he will return everything to them 100-fold. The enraged aristocrat rushes at Tatsuma with a scream, preparing to strike. However, Tatsuma easily dodges it, remaining unharmed. With one sharp movement, he delivers a powerful blow straight into the attacker's face. The force of the blow sends the aristocrat flying several meters away. Without stopping, Tatsuma prepares for the next crushing blow. Having flown into the wall, he falls to the ground with a dull thud. The aristocrat is completely defeated, unconscious. Those around him are stunned by what they see, and Tatsuma only slightly clenches his fists. The audience is amazed as Tatsuma easily knocks out Kamihara. The nobles standing nearby realize that Tatsuma didn't even draw his sword, and this frightens them. After a short fight, Tatsuma calmly leaves, leaving everyone behind. He walks slowly towards the high university gates. In response to his daring performance, the other students begin to applaud. They admire his actions, shouting words of approval and praise. Tatsuma is slightly surprised by the crowd's violent reaction. Despite his dislike of attention, he admits that he even enjoys it. Entering the room, Tatsuma sees a student waiting for him. His name is Butte, and he happily introduces himself to Tatsuma. Tatsuma introduces himself in return, and they shake hands, becoming roommates. Butte immediately begins praising him, calling him a hero of the common people for the recent incident at the gate. Tatsuma guesses that they are talking about him and feels awkward from such attention. Butte continues to animatedly recount how all the aristocrats immediately felt ill. Although Tatsuma tries to downplay the incident, Butte insists that the aristocrats were in complete shock. Tatsuma internally admits that the outcome of the fight only shows his opponent's weakness. Ignoring his modesty, Butte pats Tatsuma on the shoulder in a friendly manner. He declares that if he is going to study here, he will do so with honor. Butte asks Tatsuma what his class is, and he replies that he is a swordsman. Butte is surprised to learn that Tatsuma, with his D- rank, managed to pass the academy's entrance exams. Despite this, Butte promises Tatsuma his support and protection. Tatsuma winces internally, remembering how he can't stand working with anyone. Tatsuma decides not to reveal his true power in order not to disturb his peaceful life and to move towards his goal unnoticed. Meanwhile, the manager informs Kamihara that the head of the family expects him to resolve the minor problem on his own. An enraged Kamihara calls Tatsuma names, refusing to acknowledge him as an ordinary commoner. Despite his severe injuries, Kamihara orders all forces to be used for the massacre. The manager nods, promising to take care of Tatsuma and make it look like an accident. Suddenly, Tatsuma senses a distant threat and says darkly, "That bastard." Meanwhile, Kamihara hatefully vows to personally see Tatsuma die. Students gather at the Ryujin University training ground. There are rumors among them that the teacher hates commoners, but it is better to keep a low profile. Benjamin Lee, a practical combat instructor, appears before them. Benjamin Lee announces that he will be leading a practice battle for the freshmen. The students look appraisingly at the new teacher. Meanwhile, Benjamin Lee, having learned about Tatsuma Emori, believes that a simple expulsion is not enough. He vows that Tatsuma will pay with his life for offending Lord Kamihara. Lee publicly announces the emergence of a D-ranked pest among them who doesn't know his place. The students are shocked and outraged to learn that there's a D rank among them. One of the students realizes with horror that they are talking about Tatsuma. Benjamin Lee pointedly points at Tatsuma, calling him a commoner D- rank swordsman. Tatsuma only smirks slightly, holding the teacher's gaze. He is just interested in how their so-called meritocracy works. The system seems simple. By leveling up, everyone can become stronger, regardless of their status. But high-ranking classes start with much better stats, and the gap only widens. Low-ranking commoners remain weak and are not destined to achieve greatness. Tatsuma knows this is nothing but injustice. But level and rank are the only weapons that remain for a commoner. Lee threatens Tatsuma with death for disobedience, but the hero only smiles in response. Tatsuma accepts the challenge, stating that he is now even more interested. Benjamin Lee shouts in rage that a commoner should not dare speak to an elder like that. The teacher just smiles, pleased with the effect produced. The students, outraged by Tatsuma's insolence, ask for permission to deal with him. A friend tries to hold Tatsuma back, urging him to apologize before it's too late. Tatsuma just smirks, stating that he likes the idea of their meritocracy. He is convinced that it is better to stand your ground to the end than to give in and surrender. Tatsuma's friend watches him with concern, realizing that it is impossible to stop him. Tatsuma resolutely climbs the steps towards the teacher. Lee smirked inwardly, thinking that the commoner's death right here would only make his life easier. Benjamin Lee dictates the terms. Tatsuma must fight unarmed, because a swordsman without a sword is worthless. Tatsuma, smiling, takes out a huge wooden sword, stating that he did not want to dirty the blade. Many students immediately rush into battle, wanting to deal with Tatsuma. Lee chooses 3 to punish the impudent commoner. Some students realize that the fight is serious, and Tatsuma might die. Lee's sinister grin shows that this only plays into his hands. Tatsuma's friend watches what is happening in horror. Tatsuma stands alone, mockingly declaring that he won't even need his hands for those 3. Suddenly, Tatsuma's friend raises his hand and says that he wants to join too. A surprised Lee assumes that the commoner wants to beat up another to rise higher, but the friend clearly states that he is on Tatsuma's side. Lee seemed to have something new in mind since the commoner had found an ally. Tatsuma's friend quickly changes his battle tactics. He suggests that Tatsuma hide behind his back in order to save his honor and place at the university. Tatsuma accepts the help with a smile, although he himself was ready to fight back. Despite his strength, Tatsuma will have to restrain himself due to a new plan. The fight begins and the 3 opponents unleash their magical attacks on them. The friend activates a powerful protective barrier, surprising even the teacher. He desperately urges Tatsuma to surrender while shielding him from attacks. Lee is annoyed. His friends are clearly dragging out the fight, which was not his plan. Suddenly, Tatsuma jumps over the barrier, rushing straight into battle. It strikes instantly, incapacitating the first enemy. Then Tatsuma quickly deals with the rest. The friend watches in bewilderment as the reprisal is astoundingly swift. A surprised friend asks if it's really over, and Tatsuma confirms. He didn't have time to realize that Tatsuma had already dealt with all the enemies. Lee is amazed at how Tatsuma used his friend's defense to perform a silent melee attack. He realizes that Tatsuma has a real dangerous combat technique. Lee suggests that Tatsuma develop this style in street fights among commoners. Tatsuma explains that the opponents relied too much on the instability of their magic. Lee pretends that the students' defeat is due to their unstable magic, ignoring the true cause. Lee again tries to humiliate Tatsuma by calling his victory over the students insignificant. He predicts that Tatsuma will soon be expelled because none of the nobles will go with him in the group for the practical exam. Tatsuma accepts Lee's challenge calmly, even looking forward to what lies ahead. Tatsuma smiles and encourages himself in anticipation of the upcoming exam. The next day, all students gather at the training grounds for a practical exam in the training dungeon. Lee announces that anyone who fails the task will be immediately expelled. To avoid fatal accidents, as in the entrance exam, special rules were introduced for this test. As Lee continues speaking, one of the students realizes that these rules are specifically aimed at commoners. Luckily, Tatsuma's friend Buchio had already found 2 aristocrats for their team. He calls Tatsuma over when 2 students, likely future teammates, approach them. Buchio officially introduces Tatsuma Emori, a talented swordsman who excels in close combat. One of the aristocrats suddenly interrupts him, puzzled. Another nobleman rejects Tatsuma with disgust, reminding him that he killed 3 nobles during the entrance exam. Buchio is clearly shocked by the rejection, while Tatsuma remains unfazed. Lee's words that no aristocrat would want to ally with him are beginning to come true. Lee watches the scene unfold. His plan to isolate Tatsuma seems to be working. Buchio decides not to despair and stay with Tatsuma despite the refusal. But to everyone's surprise, one of the aristocrats agrees to join, because a B-rank paladin is always useful. Buchio is stunned by this unexpected decision, and Tatsuma stares at his new teammate. While one aristocrat is clearly dissatisfied, the other smiles confidently, completing the formation of the team. Behind that smile, Tatsuma was clearly hiding darker thoughts. Buchio seems relieved, but Tatsuma remains wary, sensing something is wrong. There's a sudden tense pause after the team is formed. Tatsuma breaks the silence, asking if it really is that simple. Suddenly, Tatsuma grabs one of the nobles, defying the academy's rules. With a devilish grin, Tatsuma reminds him that he is not one to fear punishment. The enraged aristocrat swings his arm, preparing to hit Tatsuma with a brick. The blow lands squarely on Tatsuma, who makes no attempt to dodge. The aristocrat is shocked to realize that Tatsuma intentionally missed the blow. Concerned, Buchio immediately asks if his friend is okay. But Tatsuma only raises his head, lighting up the field with his creepy smile. His sinister laugh makes the aristocrat shudder with fear. The aristocrat asks in horror what Tatsuma is going to do. In response, Tatsuma slams his foot into the ground. Tatsuma's powerful blow sends the aristocrat flying into the air. The aristocrat slams into the wall with great force. From the strong blow, the aristocrat groans painfully, barely alive. The second nobleman attacks Tatsuma in a rage, but he promises not to hold back any longer. The aristocrat points his flaming fist at Tatsuma, but Tatsuma easily intercepts his hand, causing his opponent to cry out in pain. Tatsuma delivers a powerful kick to the second noble's stomach. The aristocrat doubles over in pain, speechless. Tatsuma mercilessly sends him to the ground as well, completely breaking his resistance. Shocked, Buchio barely audibly says Tatsuma's name, realizing the seriousness of what is happening. Tatsuma approaches the third noble, who panics and tries to stop him in his father's name. But Tatsuma's determination did not waver, and he continued on his way. Buchio stops his friend, trying to convince him to think about the exams and the fact that they won't even be able to put together a team. Tatsuma apologizes, claiming that he is willing to take full responsibility for his actions. Buchio desperately reminds that Tatsuma is not the only commoner, and they all have to follow strict rules. He warns that Tatsuma's antics will only make life difficult for other students from the lower classes. While Tatsuma silently ponders his friend's words, the third aristocrat quietly disappears from sight. Now that the two aristocrats have been defeated, only Tatsuma and Buchio remain on the field. A dark, thoughtful look can be seen on Tatsuma's face. Tatsuma, looking down, admits that it would be better for him to remain alone. He explains that without friends and family, he will not hurt anyone, because this is the only way to avoid losses. Buchio, amazed, tries to express his admiration for Tatsuma's strength. He reminds his friend of his promise to protect him no matter what. Buchio convinces Tatsuma that if he is expelled, he will not even have a chance to change the unfair rules. Buchio's words seem to penetrate Tatsuma, causing him to think. With a slight grin, Tatsuma agrees that Buchio is setting his mind straight. Buchio, pleased, hugs his friend tightly, anticipating their future exploits. Tatsuma decides to temporarily calm down in order to later become the strongest and break the system, starting with the recruitment of a team. Soon the friends arrive at the entrance to the training dungeon, the site of the upcoming trials. The day was clear, but serious trials awaited them. At the entrance to the training dungeon, a crowd of other students was already waiting for them, ready for the exam. The other aristocratic students instantly recognized Tatsuma and Buchio, openly expressing their dislike. Even ordinary students preferred to stay away from them, fearing possible trouble. Buchio was being shunned, and Tatsuma realized that they had lost support even among their own. But Tatsuma knew that if you remained a sheep all your life, the wolves would simply eat you. Despite everything, Tatsuma stepped forward resolutely, ready to challenge the odds. Suddenly, a mocking voice called Tatsuma the legendary star of the commoners. With undisguised mockery, he asked if his name was correct. Tatsuma Emori. Buchio immediately recognizes Shin Hisashi, an A-ranked noble assassin known for his strength, but also for his calculating, hated nature. Shin looked at Tatsuma with an arrogant grin. Shin then mockingly addressed another student, calling him a B-rank paladin. The student, who turned out to be a B-rank paladin, asked in surprise why Shin had approached him specifically. But the paladin didn't like Shin's dismissive call of Tatsuma as a team killer. Buchio, realizing Shin's attempt to isolate them, immediately asked why he was ignoring Tatsuma. Shin just broke into a smug grin, confirming his intentions. An angry Buchio stated categorically that he would only join the team with Tatsuma. Shin countered that Buchio's loyalty might be commendable, but it was impractical. But Tatsuma, to Buchio's surprise, advised him to agree to Shin's proposal. He added that he would somehow manage on his own. Tatsuma again urged Buchio to accept the invitation while Shin watched them tensely. Suddenly, Tatsuma stopped Shin. Tatsuma guessed that Shin was probably going to challenge him openly. He sarcastically explained that it would be better for Buchio to take advantage of the opportunity offered by Shin. Tatsuma put Shin on the spot by asking if his proposal was too suspicious. Shin, clearly taken aback, acknowledged Tatsuma's insight. Shin, having given up, decided to reveal his cards, announcing the information he had obtained about the dungeon. He explained that the dungeon had high resistance to magic, putting noble mages at a disadvantage. The physical classes of commoners, unlike the nobles, were ideally suited for this test. However, Shin again stated that Tatsuma was not worthy of being in his squad. But then he added that Tatsuma was not like other commoners. He graciously allowed Tatsuma to join the squad, expecting gratitude. Tatsuma, ignoring Shin's smugness, began to analyze his true motives. He pointed out that such a move would turn all the school's nobles against Shin, which was strange for a calculating man. Tatsuma stared at Shin, trying to figure out his plan. Shin, trying to hide his confusion, asked if it was bad that he would make enemies. Tatsuma mockingly guessed the real reason. Shin, although strong, could not assemble a squad because of his reputation. Tatsuma continued that, according to the school's rules, commoners were required to unite with the nobles. Nobles, despite their magical powers, still need commoners to successfully pass the tests. This rule was introduced so that commoners could serve as human shields, protecting nobles in the dungeons. But since even the nobles can't stand Shin, no one wants to join his squad. And the rest of the commoners are too weak, so Shin simply has no choice. Both of their faces showed complete understanding of the situation. Suddenly, Shin stopped Tatsuma abruptly, not allowing him to continue. Shin leaned towards Tatsuma to say something quietly to him. He reminded that Tatsuma himself was in a hopeless situation and could not reject his offer. Tatsuma looked at the outstretched hand seriously, making a decision. After some thought, Tatsuma accepted the terms, sealing the deal with a handshake. Buchio was quiet to realize that he too was in the same squad with them. Shin immediately declared himself the leader of the squad, demanding obedience, which did not please Buchio. At that moment, Shin noticed Higashi, who, as always, was getting under his feet. Higashi turned to Shin with a smile, hinting that assembling a squad was only half the battle. He ominously reminded them that accidents in the dungeons were much more common than in school. Tatsuma clearly imagined Higashi watching them die in the dungeon. Many squads gathered in front of the portal leading to the dungeon. Suddenly, Tatsuma heard someone calling him and turned around. Higashi called Tatsuma lucky with a sly smile, which sounded like a direct threat. However, Higashi stated that he actually just came to congratulate them. At the same time, Higashi emphasized that as a teacher, he had no right to hinder Tatsuma. Higashi's sinister grin only confirmed his true intentions. Buchio is outraged by such cynicism, but Higashi simply brushed off his words. In response to this, Tatsuma only smiled confidently, showing that he was not afraid of threats. Tatsuma's smile clearly threw Higashi off balance, causing him to hide his anger behind an aggressive tone. Then Higashi threw the key to the dungeon gate at them, wanting to provoke them. It turned out to be an obsidian key, which usually opened the way into particularly dangerous areas. Higashi asked sarcastically if they were afraid to use it, but Shin firmly refused to give in to provocation. Higashi grinned maliciously, anticipating how the dungeon would show them their place. He was sure that very soon they would pay for their arrogance. Accepting the challenge, Shin gave the command, and they resolutely headed into the sparkling portal of the dungeon. Once inside, Shin, as the leader, immediately began to determine their battle formation. The stone vaults of the dungeon oppressed with their uncertainty and threat. Shin continued to assign roles, declaring that he would handle attacks from the rear. Tatsuma was clearly dissatisfied with the way Shin was giving out commands without regard for his experience. Meanwhile, Buchio activated his protective shield, preparing to take the first blow. Noticing Tatsuma's displeasure, Buchio suddenly shouted at him, demanding that he obey the leader's orders. But Buchio hadn't even managed to take a couple of steps before the floor beneath his feet cracked treacherously. Tatsuma immediately realized that this was a carefully planned trap. The floor collapsed and a huge swarm of spiders immediately poured out. It turned out that Buchio suffered from severe arachnophobia and was completely paralyzed with terror. At that moment, Tatsuma activated fire magic and, abandoning Buchio, rushed into battle. His fire attacks were effective in destroying spiders, as they were vulnerable to flame. Tatsuma, chuckling, demonstrated his superiority over ordinary monsters. While Tatsuma dealt with the spiders, Shin carefully observed the battlefield. He noticed that the spiders, ignoring Tatsuma, reacted aggressively to his presence. Tatsuma was surprised to find that, despite his attacks, the bulk of the spiders were heading towards Shin. He realized that the spiders seemed to be hunting targets with stronger mana. However, Tatsuma was confused by the fact that the spiders weren't just attacking Shin, but seemed clearly confused. In the past, Shin made a radical decision to completely abandon magic in favor of a purely physical class. Thus, he awakened the hidden talent, Manless, permanently resetting his mana and replacing it with stamina. Shin believed that completely abandoning magic would allow him to develop his physical abilities to the maximum and become stronger. Tatsuma seemed to know that those with the Besmani constitution could not upgrade their class. Buchio's shout suddenly brought Tatsuma out of his deep thoughts. While Buchio was still panicking, Shin stood calmly beside him, showing composure. The spiders seemed to retreat, and Shin and Buchio exchanged a few words. Buchio was puzzled because the monsters did not attack everyone. He didn't understand what this trick with selective attacks was. Shin looked closely and began to formulate his guess. While they were trying to understand what was happening, something ominous appeared before them, hidden behind chains and a magical barrier. The ground shook and began to split, releasing a stream of dark energy. A powerful burst of this force pierced everything around. Soon, the boss of the zone himself appeared through the rift. Cursed Elite Gaitis. Level 5, Death Rejector. Tatsuma immediately recognized him as a hidden Level 5 elite boss, which came as a shocking revelation to everyone. Tatsuma realized that they had been lured into a trap and blamed a certain Lee, who had slipped them the key. He explained that this boss was incomparably stronger than any normal Level 5 monster. His strength was so great that even a group of 5 fully equipped Level 7 fighters would not feel safe. Tatsuma cried out in despair that this was a one-way ticket, foreshadowing their doom. In response to their appearance, the boss pronounced his verdict. Only death was in store for the intruders. Gaitis did not hesitate and, swinging his sword, moved straight towards the frightened Tatsuma. However, Shin reacted with lightning speed, taking a step forward and preparing to attack. With a slight grin, Shin said that the boss's choice of target was purely a matter of luck. He made the decision to face the boss right there. To everyone's surprise, the boss was thrown back, and Shin deftly dodged his blow. His body burst into red flames, reviving his fighting spirit. With incredible determination, he was ready to challenge the mortal threat. A frightened Tatsuma, not understanding Shin's motives, shouted out that he had no intention of interfering in this crazy battle. Buchio was puzzled as Tatsuma's body suddenly caught fire. But seeing Shin's determination in the face of the massive boss, Buchio suddenly realized that they still had a chance to win. Buchio declared that he was also going to fight, leaving Tatsuma completely confused. Shin explained that they would let the boss attack multiple times to learn its tactics. Buchio, realizing the full danger of the situation, nevertheless decisively moved into battle. Shin tried to stop him, but Buchio was already performing his shield break, rushing forward. For Buchio, the tank's task was obvious. Always rush to the front lines. Gaitis, taking aim at Buchio, declared that he would make a hole in his defense. The boss concentrated, preparing for the decisive blow. A powerful blow from Gaitis fell on Buchio's shield. Thrown back by the powerful blow, Buchio flew back. The boss continued to advance, while Buchio flew back and crashed hard into the wall. Flying into the wall, Buchio felt the full force of the blow and suffered serious injuries. Tatsuma, shocked by Gaitis' power, declared that it was useless to fight such a monster. Tatsuma announced that he was retreating, abandoning his comrades to certain death. Gaitis, wasting no time, prepared to deliver the next crushing blow. But Shin rushed forward with lightning speed, trying to block Gaitis' attack. Crossing blades, Gaitis and Shin began a fierce fight. Shin, focused on the battle, confidently took the blow without losing strength. Tatsuma, watching the fight, was perplexed by Shin's madness, who continued to fight alone. The boss's powerful blow sent Shin flying, but at that moment he realized Tatsuma's true intentions. Despite his injuries, Shin shouted at Gaitis to change his target to him. Buchio, feeling humiliated, called upon fire magic to strengthen his attack. He noticed a gap in Gaitis' defense and decided to take advantage of it to take the victory. However, to his horror, the magical blow to the boss's back did not cause any damage. Shin continued to fight bravely, blocking Gaitis' attacks. Buchio tried to free himself from the boss's grip, but his fire blades were of no use. Shin, seeing how Buchio was getting in the way, urged him to move away and not create any obstacles. Suddenly, Gaitis lifted Buchio into the air, distracting his attention. At that moment, Shin launched a sharp blow, aiming for the boss's limb. To everyone's amazement, Shin severed one of Gaitis' arms with one movement. Buchio collapsed to the ground, and the disfigured boss staggered from his wound. Lying on the ground, Buchio realized with shock the seriousness of the situation. Tatsuma watched the fight from afar, convinced of Shin's extraordinary abilities. He couldn't believe that Shin could injure the powerful boss so much with his ordinary sword. Gaitis, having lost a limb, continued to attack furiously, but Shin deftly dodged. Shin dodged the blow again, sliding under the monster's arm. The boss's powerful blow shook the ground, nearly hitting Shin while Buchio was helpless. Shin, unable to bear it any longer, ordered Buchio not to interfere and not to be a burden. Buchio was furious at these words, trying to express indignation and justify himself. Inwardly, he admitted that Shin's strength was undeniable and in no way fit for the trash class. The battle between Shin and Gaitis raged on, their blades clashing in a furious dance. Shin fought off Gaitis' furious attacks, their forces clashing. Even with his arms severed, Gaitis did not give up, his resolve remaining unwavering. Shin understood that a single-handed frontal attack against such a powerful enemy would mean certain death. However, Shin's fighting spirit flared up with renewed vigor, refusing to admit defeat. Shin knew that his sword synchronization would allow him to deal true damage while ignoring Gatus's defense. Their blades crossed again, and Shin's synchronization-enhanced power clashed with the boss's might. Shin's main task remained to find a vulnerability and a way to deliver a decisive blow to the elusive boss. Tatsuma, shocked, could barely follow the battle, not understanding how Shin was dealing with the 7th-stage boss. Gaidus swung his sword for a crushing blow, looming over Shin. Under the onslaught of the boss's furious attack, Shin had to dodge sharply, narrowly avoiding a direct hit. Gaidus missed, but his blow left a huge crater, shaking the cave. The powerful blow narrowly missed Shin, demonstrating the boss's destructive power. Buchio began to question Shin about the progress of the fight, not understanding its complexity. Suddenly, another enemy appeared. A skeleton warrior with a sword emitting the same ominous energy. The skeleton raised his blade, his eyes glowing purple as he prepared to attack. Shin saw the new threat and shouted for Buchio to dodge the skeleton's attack. Buchio barely managed to dodge the deadly blade, realizing his helplessness. In horror, Buchio realized that he was on the verge of death, and a cold sweat broke out on him. Shin scolded Buchio again, telling him not to get in the way and not to be a burden. Buchio's gaze fell on the severed skeletal hand lying on the ground. Buchio noticed that the skeleton's severed arm was not just lying there, but had flown past. It turned out that the skeleton had not simply lost his arm, he had easily regained it with the help of undead regeneration. Shin rushed to attack, but the skeleton was already holding the sword again, with his regenerated hand. Shin understood that the enemy would regenerate without stopping, and they had no time to hesitate. However, Shin was forced to dodge another crushing blow from the purple sword. Shin struck, to which the skeleton responded with an angry exclamation, continuing to resist. Focusing, Shin put all his strength into the next strike, hoping to break through the defense. Jumping up, Shin continued to maneuver, dodging the skeleton's sweeping attacks. Shin realized that even with his new class, he couldn't withstand the constant, powerful blows of this opponent. With limited chances to attack, Shin frantically searched for a way to accurately hit the skeleton's weak spot. Looking at Buchio, Shin thought about the need to distract the enemy's attention. Buchio, still shaken by what had happened, looked visibly nervous as he looked at Shin. Shin suddenly remembered that the locals didn't understand his game terms, such as the concept of aggro. Memories of the past, where such teams were a common part of game raids, flashed before Shin's eyes. He remembered how often he saw the sign, "Player died," due to poor team coordination. He remembered his transition to another world, Sarisha, whose city looked completely different. Shin understood that the people of Sarithia had received the game's class system, but had not mastered the concepts associated with it. The locals are still just mastering combat mechanics, so Shin will have to choose words that Buchio will definitely understand. Shin decided to explain directly to Buchio that he needed to deal with the boss and create an opportunity for him to attack. Buchio panicked and asked how exactly he was supposed to attract the attention of such a powerful opponent. Buchio, feeling humiliated, asked Shin to shut up, confident that his previous attack had only accidentally failed to cause damage. This time, Buchio was determined not to let Shin look down on him. Shin realized that Buchio's pride would be the driving force in their fight against the massive skeleton. Buchio called upon fire magic, enchanting his blades with Flame Blade for a decisive blow. With a cry of, "Don't you dare underestimate me!" Buchio rushed forward, leaving a trail of fire behind him. He jumped on the boss, aiming for his skull so that he couldn't ignore his presence. Buchio's long blades pierced the skeleton's skull, but the sound indicated that the effect was extremely weak. Buchio froze, realizing that even his reinforced blades couldn't penetrate the boss's strong defense. Ignoring his attempts, the boss threw Buchio away with a powerful blow. Buchio crashed into the rock with a loud thud, leaving cracks in it, and fell helplessly to the ground. The skeleton, its eyes gleaming menacingly, stared at the fallen Buchio, confirming its undeniable power. However, this moment was enough for Shin to quickly rush to the boss's weak spot.